That being said, this is something that it is a big report. We kept going. We just got excited. One more deal, one more ideas, because conversations wait. All of this will be up and available on the website. All of it can be, you can download it individually by section, as well as other pieces, because this was really meant to be pulled apart and put to use. So with that said, pulled apart, put to use, what a better segue than to Ben Hecht, CEO.
I'm not sure how to read into that.
As a proud
it's all true, but I'm not sure exactly how to read it.
As I am a card-carrying member of the Ben Hecht Living Cities fan club. And so Ben's background in thinking about these issues of low-income communities, use of capital, making things happen, bringing people together, integrating is just phenomenal. And so I can think of nobody better to turn the car keys over to than to Ben.
Super. Thank you. Thanks for having us. We wanted to focus on pull out one issue over the next, I guess, almost hour, 45 minutes or so. And that is the role of philanthropy in kind of embarking on large-scale impact investing initiatives. And we're really fortunate to have these two folks here to talk about that. The MacArthur Foundation, much like Reggie said, has really been a pioneer, like Kellogg, in this work. And the pioneer within MacArthur is the woman immediately to my right, which is Debra Schwartz. And so Debra's going to talk about, hopefully, kind of we get a little bit of the arc of history, you know, kind of how they started and then how it landed in one of their more recent initiatives, which is the Windows of Opportunity work, a large-scale effort on preserving affordable housing. And so Debra's going to talk for 5 or 7 minutes about that, and then we're going to go to Kate, and Kate is the head of the McKnight Foundation, who recently committed 10% of their money towards doing this. And how did they, in a relatively recent effort, what did it take to build that? And what have they learned from that? So we hope that after 45 minutes you have a feel for some of the key lessons about how you can do this on a scale through philanthropy. And then there's obviously a lot more written in the book. So let me just start with Deb, if you don't mind, kind of tell your story.
Okay, thank you, Ben, and good morning to everyone, and sorry to be a little behind. I think the time zone difference wreaked havoc on Outlook calendars this morning, so I really apologize. I'm really delighted to be here, and I was super excited to have the chance working with Melissa and Marissa, and wherever Marissa is, she really, she may not have 6 kids, but she acts like 6 people all at once. Because we've been at this work for a long time, as Ben said. The foundation, I am not the pioneer. The pioneer is a man named Paul Lingenfelter, who was at the foundation and our director of evaluation. So it just tells you how many different places can be the place where impact investing takes root. And in the mid-1980s, he heard about what Ford was doing with program-related investments, and he was really interested in this idea of what he called helping organizations generate their own steam, which of course is what we would call social enterprise today, right? And he was the one that got the foundation to start experimenting, $1 million for some new thing called enterprise, a new thing called local initiative support corporation, a new thing called self-help, which at the time was really excited because they might get to $10 million of assets. And if you know self-help today, they have $2 billion under management and are serving tens of thousands of people all over the country. So he was the real pioneer, and then he was followed by Greg Ratliff, and many of you may know Greg, and he worked for 10 years getting to do all kinds of stuff, and he really was experimenting and at the cutting edge, was doing work internationally back in the 90s around organic and sustainable agriculture. So I want to just be clear that I'm just like Anne acknowledged the fact that the new work that's happening, which is super exciting, and Melissa was saying, you know, it builds on CRA, it builds on other things. Everything I've got to do at the MacArthur Foundation was because of Paul and Greg and the ground that our colleagues at Ford and others had paved. So in 1999, we decided to pay attention to rental housing. And I want you to just pause and think about that our foundation, so Kate has got her foundation to do something pretty amazing. I think it's pretty amazing that MacArthur was willing in 1999 to say rental housing, because at that time, everyone in philanthropy and increasingly in government was really focused. It's hard to remember now because we've come out of the other side of the housing bubble, but people were obsessed with home ownership, and not for crazy reasons. We had folks in our CDFI portfolio who were really interested in asset building. People had understood that to get out of poverty, it's not enough just to think about income. You got to think about assets, and how do we build assets in the United States? We do that through home ownership. And there had been this history, right, of redlining and of not giving people access to mortgage credit. So it wasn't a bad thing that people were worried about home ownership, but what we became worried about is that that had tipped already to this place that didn't make sense. And that 36 million people were still living in rental housing, and who were those people that needed that rental housing? Vast majority, working poor, low income, seniors, people with, physical disabilities. And we thought, wow, this is not a good situation. If we start abandoning the country's rental housing and don't pay attention to it, we're not only going to lose an asset in which the public sector has invested, billions of dollars. We're going to leave a lot of people without the options that they need to have a decent life. So I'm delighted that our story of what we call window of opportunity, it's called a deal at a glance, but it's actually an initiative. It's dozens and dozens and dozens of grants. I think it's 50 program-related investments. It's $200 million in 15 years of my life and my foundation's work. And so I'm delighted we had a chance to share that story with you, and I hope you'll take a look. The other thing I wanted to flag is it's in the story, it's in the section about assets, which is great because that was our whole objective was, right, to say rental housing is an asset too. It's an asset to the people that live in it, and if it's done right, it's an asset to the community and to the local economy because it creates a diversity of housing options. But I also think it is about health and well-being. So we'd like to straddle both sections. If we could be an honorary member of that. And Bill Kelly from Stewards of Affordable Housing is here. And one of the things that's been amazing to see is how things have taken root over the 15 years. And one of the things we realize is we have millions of low-income seniors living in affordable rental housing. And increasingly, they are aging and frail and are intensive users of medical services. And there is a revolution going on about how to not just put them into skilled nursing beds and cost the government lots of Medicaid dollars, but how can we change the platform that they live in and use affordable housing to allow them to age with dignity and well-being in place and stay in their homes and their community. So that's the kind of giant conceptual backdrop of why we care about this issue. I would just say that a couple of things that were different for us about this initiative before we go on to McKnight, and these are profiled in the write-up. This was the first time for us that we didn't just sort of make an individual investment and kind of think of it as where is there a really innovative institution or individual or business model. Here's somebody doing micro-enterprise in Latin America, post-conflict Latin America. Here's someone doing an agriculture finance scheme in Mexico. Here's someone trying to do small business in Appalachia. And that's much of what impact investing had to be in the 1990s, very opportunistic. This was conceived from the beginning where the impact investments and our grants would work in concert together as part of a single coordinated strategy. And what the impact investments did was they gave us this big chunk of resources to be the fuel for on-the-ground practice. Because what we discovered really early on is we started looking at what was happening in rental housing that already existed, and that was our focus, was not building new, because there's only enough subsidy in this country to build 100,000 new apartments every year. And there's only enough subsidy today in this country for 1 out of every 5 people that is eligible to have subsidy. And the reason I'm talking about subsidy is not because I'm giving up and not trying to solve it with market forces. But affordable housing right now today in this country is a math problem. People's incomes, because of the bifurcation that has happened, and because people living on Social Security or disability are on fixed incomes, they're not going to get wealthier. This is the income they have. That income is not enough to cover the operating costs, let alone the capital costs of building and maintaining decent housing. So there isn't anywhere in the country where you can figure out how to solve the math problem of a senior citizen on $9,000 a year of income, being able to live in that housing without spending every dime, on her rent and still being, out of luck. So we don't have enough affordable rental housing to go around with to begin with, and what we discovered was we were losing like 2 units for every 1 unit the country was building. So we were running harder and harder to stay in place. So that's why we focused on preservation. And from the beginning, what we discovered was it wasn't enough to just think about it. We love the work of places like Aspen Institute and white papers, and we funded a whole bunch of think tanks that have done great policy work, legal analysis, Bill's organization, block and tackle in there with HUD and wrestling the regulations to make them better. But at the end of the day, the real change agents for us were a set of housing organizations that actually were on the ground buying and preserving and renovating and operating the actual buildings in which people lived. And it was through that work of doing those transactions, those preservation deals, that they were changing the game. Because it was only when they were actually working on a real project that they could get to the table with the regulator who had the rule that was making it impossible to, use this piece of money and that piece of private money and this piece of philanthropic money. It was only at the deal table that they could solve the problems. It had to go from the abstract to the real. So that is why we made this choice to put very substantial sums in the hands of 22 nonprofits that were operating at regional and national scale, because we thought we could do a couple of things. We could make the problem visible by the scale of their work. We could help them grow, and they did indeed grow. We will have a survey completed next year, but we think that through our financing, more than 100,000 and possibly as much as 200,000. We've added a lot to our portfolio since the survey was last done, but we think 250,000 people more are being served by these developers than they were when we began. And about $6 billion of permanent capital has been brought into that housing stock by these organizations. But our goal was never just, we can't do enough. No matter how big those numbers sound, we can't do enough ourselves. They can't do enough themselves. This is not a problem that gets solved because everything new gets old. So this is about changing a system and making sure that there's always the tools to keep preserving what's wearing out. Real estate wears out. It needs your own house, my own house for sure, wears out. You got to fix it. So what we really wanted was to help them have the opportunity to change the system, to change the rules of the game, to make the environment more friendly and conducive to preservation. And so a key thing that we did was focus on what we call enterprise-level financing, and that's described in the book. And what that led us to, and one of the lessons was, you have to really think hard about how you build strong organizations. It's not just enough to give them capital, but it's to really think about the data that they need, the talent that they need, the governance that they need. You got to be really holistic about it and not tie them up in knots. We did not give them project-level capital. That would have been less risky for us, but much less useful to them. So that was one thing. I would say the other is public-private. So we have done about 15 public-private funds through this initiative. The New York City Housing Acquisition Fund is probably the best known, but in this write-up, we profile something we did with Mass Mutual and 5 other banks. And we were really excited about this. We did a $20 million guarantee, and it brought in $240 million of capital, so a 1 to 10 plus ratio, which we were super excited about. We never had to put a single dime out the door. And it brought capital projects that were totally stuck. They would not happen. We actually really know this and are very proud of that. So the power of using impact investments strategically, being the but-for piece, that's not what is the only reason you can use impact investments. For us, that's what we really care about because we can take the risk and we like to do that. And then in 2007, we expanded the initiative and we began directly working with state and local government. And I think Ben will talk more about that in the integration initiative. But we realized that state and local government, from the beginning, would be a key set of players. But it was really clear by 2006-07 that that they were the key players. You know, the federal government is important, but so much is happening at that local level. And so we did an RFP, and we invited state and local governments and local partners like universities and nonprofits to apply directly to us for a combination of grant and impact investing dollars. And through that, we ended up funding 12 localities and states, and in one case, it was a county. And I think, you know, that led us to further appreciate just that importance of using impact investing dollars to bring partners to the table. We worked with community foundations through that partnership. It's really been fantastic to see how it has been able to unfold. And I think the last thing I'll just close with is, and this is one of the lessons learned that I also flag for you. You really need to think about this as a grounds-up kind of innovation approach. I think it's really easy in the foundation world for us to sort of create our precious theory of change and to have our map of the world. And you need a logic model, right? Like if you don't know what you're doing, you know, I think I'm going to make the world better and I'm going to throw some money here and here and here, you're not going to have any effect. So I'm not saying abandon critical thinking and logic. But it is very easy to sort of rarefy very complex dynamic problems and think that if I put my money in here and I give it to these people and I tell them to do these things, this result will happen. And of course, it would be nice if that's how the world worked, because then evaluation would be a lot easier. But it's not like that. And I think what I'm most proud of and excited about what we've been able to do is I think we were given both impact investment dollars and grant dollars and allowed to go look for where innovation and problem solving was already happening. Where were folks already thinking about this issue? We did not say, we know you work on home ownership, would you please go over here and work on rental housing? There were people that were worried about rental housing. They worried deeply about it, and they were deeply creative and effective, but they didn't have the resources they needed. And I think by putting more resources in their hands, playing that convening role, giving them some visibility, we really feel like we were able to allow that innovation to kind of take shape itself very organically, and it's taken us in places we never expected. So another shout out to Bill and some of the peer networks like Housing Partnership Network, with whom his organization works. We're doing a whole special added initiative now on energy efficiency, $30 million. Because what emerged from this group of housing owners was that one of their largest controllable costs was energy. Can't control property taxes, can't control property insurance costs, but you can control your energy consumption. And it turned out they didn't know anything about the energy consumption in their buildings. So a small grant, $200,000, allowed them to begin to collect data about their buildings. And out of that, we're now making $25 million of impact investments to unlock capital for energy upgrades, to solve particular kinds of financing challenges that are extremely hard for multifamily buildings, which we won't go into, but they include things like financing through your utility bill. Getting repayment through your utility bill. There's a fantastic pay-for-success concept that has been kicking around in the federal administration, and we're really excited to see if this can happen because we think pay-for-success is a great mechanism to solve something nasty called the split incentive. And this is all proof that impact investing is also really good if you're a finance geek. But anyway, so it's taken us into energy efficiency. It's taken us into thinking about seniors and healthcare and how all of those things connect. But I think at the end of the day, you know, it is about recognizing that all enterprises, be they nonprofit, be they for-profit, they need capital to take risk, to be strong, to innovate, you know, to grow. And what I think is incredibly valuable about impact investments is it allows us to prioritize the purposes of those enterprises first. And if you are lucky enough to be in a foundation, you get to design the capital to solve the particular problems of that enterprise. We don't have to be the hammer in search of the nail. We can be the puzzle piece that solves the problem and brings the Mass Mutual or the other banks to the table.
So let me use that to transition to Kate, because
Yep.
I think
Yep.
that's I think it's a great point. And what's so interesting is to see that arc, and then you see McKnight under Kate's leadership saying, okay, how do we build upon what's been learned in places like MacArthur and take it from there. And so maybe you could help us through the process that you went through in the last couple of years to figure out, and knowing Kate, as I do, it's like you're going to do that in a way that says, I'm not going to reinvent the wheel.
Correct.
And so how did you do it, and how's it going?
Great. Well, thank you. It's really an honor to be here, and particularly because I have to just give out another shout out to MacArthur and Kellogg and others from whom we have learned tremendously, everything from the art of the deal that they've been involved in, thinking at enterprise level, staffing and structure, and the multiple bottom lines and how to think about evaluation. So there is a richness of learning. It's hard to find in one place. Mm-hmm. So reports like this, I think, are going to be really helpful to help more of philanthropy find a glide path in that fits them. And we all know philanthropy is idiosyncratic, so there's not one size that fits all. So we have actually kind of taken from many different things, and I thought what I'd share in kind of sharing our story is, what do I think some of the entry points for more philanthropy would be to move into this space? And all of these were somewhat present in our story, but I think any one of them might have been enough. One is a champion on the board, and in our case it was a younger family member, 40s, so not, kind of right out of grad school, but younger in terms of looking at their own portfolio, wanting to align it more closely with their values, being a family member in a family foundation and bringing that into the board where I had huge amount of skepticism and kind of a traditional separation between investments. We make the money, the grant side spends it, and the two shall never meet. We had some of that going on. So having a champion, particularly of younger generation, bring that moral suasion, I think can be a very powerful entry point. Program staff who through their grant making and convening and policy work we're increasingly looking at market-based solutions and engagement with the market, and particularly, quite honestly, as a lot of federal policy got stuck, the sort of philanthropy hypothesis, you really use policy to drive the markets, wasn't working so well, and there were a lot of new innovations coming out of the marketplace. So as we were seeing that in the grant-making side, also had the inquisitiveness and curiosity of program staff to say, what about that other 95%? How do we broaden our toolkit and have more robust ways of saying, again, what problem are we trying to solve, and what are the different forms of capital as well as convening and policy work that could really provide a more holistic response? I think that could be another powerful way for philanthropy to move more fully into this, especially as we can see more examples and more opportunities for kind of easy entry into transactions that are already, the hard work has been done in a sense, and there's an opportunity to join in. Peer pressure. McKnight is not known for going out and talking about what we're going to do before we've done it. We're good Midwesterners. We want to do it all. The work speaks for itself, and maybe we never talk about it. So the fact that we were willing to make a public our commitment in this was both very uncomfortable and, quite honestly, kind of depressing to say that 10% of our endowment, $200 million, was going to position us as a leader. I actually found kind of depressing. So now we're trying to leverage that and turn it around and say, no, it's an opportunity. So share our story, and we're going to share it, good, bad, ugly, the warts as we go on, because another thing that helped us was really being able to position this as still an emergent field. And the through line of that is McKnight did PRIs back in the 1980s, some very successful ones, and that was kind of the emergent field then. And then we had one or two that apparently were just horrific in terms of legal costs and transactions and never went ahead, and everything just sort of stopped. And so for about 15 years, we just kind of took a hiatus from everything. Fast forward, so never let a good crisis go to waste. So the foreclosure crisis, as a place-based funder in the Midwest and seeing the impact in communities where McKnight had been a philanthropic funder, huge investments in building the housing field and CDFIs and that whole infrastructure, and just seeing how decimated the communities in which we worked were being hit by foreclosures. That was our opportunity to reintroduce PRIs, $10 million PRI, very little discussion from the board, some good due diligence again, but it was sort of, no, we have to do something, and the grants won't be enough. This won't be enough, but it would actually be a really critical way to move back into the PRI world. So the board basically said, yeah, so you can have about $50 million. For PRIs, let's just start establishing a program again, and made an important decision, which I think is another one philanthropy needs to think about. Is that going to be part of our qualifying distribution and grant money, or is it above and beyond? And I'm going to be one of the biggest advocates. It should be above and beyond. Again, just because I think from a nonprofit standpoint, our grantees really appreciate that we're willing to tap into our endowment for that. And at the level that we're doing it, it's really not a big drain on the endowment. So another entry point, crisis. Our other big driver is climate change, so we are picking the 2 existential crises. So again, kind of peer pressure, and for us, this say-do continuum, what do we say and what do we commit to in our program goals, and how well or not does our endowment align with that? So those in the energy space are getting really pushed around divestment questions. We have not chosen to fully divest at this point, but we said we better have a really good answer for why we aren't and what we're doing about it. So all to say, as all these things came to play, our board, especially by the board champion, said, let's take a year-long learning process. We don't know if we're ever going to do anything more or not. That learning process quickly became a design process. We had a really great, Imprint Capital was a great strategy consultant. Kellogg shared its experience working across a couple of prongs, and we ended up making decisions about, we'll look across asset classes, we will dedicate, and we didn't really even say it's going to be 10%, it just sort of added up. Let's pick a couple of different buckets that allow us different capital tools, so public markets, private market funds, private market direct investments, which again Kellogg sort of pioneered, and program related. And let's just say 50 to each, and if it squishes around, but it gives us something to start with. And it means that as we look at a deal now, we're actually saying, well, what grant tool would be, what kind of grant would help on this? What kind of, is it a PRI? Is it a market rate? How are we going to benchmark it? We also talked a lot about our roles, which is, I think, another thing philanthropy should think about, not just kind of deal making, which is why I'm not talking a lot about deals, everybody else will today, is the roles. So we are a consumer of financial services. We are an asset owner. How do we mobilize shareholder? And for us, if we're not going to divest, we really need to be voting our proxies, getting more engaged in shareholder. I think that actually is an easy entry point for more foundations. Even if they're not ready to go whole hog into kind of, we're going to get in and do a lot of transactions. I think the market is starting to provide more products. So let me just, one or two other things because I want to leave room for discussion. So we have these different prongs. We have these different roles laid out. Our 2 areas of emphasis are our region and communities, which is housing, economic mobility, very place-based, so that limits, in a sense, what kind of deals we can actually look at, and then our climate program where I think there's a lot happening in the market. The interesting thing for us, which I think, again, is just something to think about as we engage with philanthropy, is our so-called non-impact part of the portfolio. My biggest skeptics on the investment committee now, every time they sit down with the manager, what are you doing on ESG? What's in our portfolio? Could we create a separately managed active portfolio? And so we are, even though we're not all in a declared way, ironically, we're now at a 15% commitment because we just dedicated $100 million to creating a new carbon efficiency product with one of our big managers, and we're about to do that again. So that's a big chunk of money now that is dedicated to something that's in the mainstream market. And that's probably one of the challenges, I think, on the forefront, too, is how do we really help start to move some of the mainstream parts of the market, demand more products from managers, and also demand more robust data sets, which, again, I think climate is somewhat ahead on carbon. I think it's a really interesting set of questions of how to translate some of that into this space around income equality. So let me stop there.
All right. So I've been told by Ann that if we don't stop at I want to open up to see if folks wanted to ask questions of these 2 folks.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in with a question.
Great, thank you.
Surya Kaluri from Bank of America. I'd like to state a challenge and see from a foundation perspective how you might think about this. So, Melissa, you were mentioning that Dave at the regional summit said we had 2 deals last year, we had 7 deals this year. that's a challenge, right? That's not enough pipeline. I'd love to see 50, 100, right? So how do we get the pipeline going? So the question from a foundation perspective is, have you thought about what the challenge is, how much you play? Sometimes it's taking a first loss position. Sometimes it might be helping generate data. Sometimes it might be helping generate track records for service providers. So what has the discussion been at your table, at both of your tables, in terms of accelerating the pipeline?
So I think each of us has something to say. I will say this. I think Pay for Success is a really promising tool. As I mentioned, it may solve a very specific problem, actually, in the energy efficiency finance field. The problem that the savings from making a building more efficient go to the tenant, but it's the owner of the building that has to take on the loan and make the improvements. So you get this mismatch, and we think it's a great tool. I'm not a big fan of being tool first, problem second. And I think we have a little risk in the Pay for Success movement of saying, where can I go apply this tool? And I think we have to be careful about that. So on the one hand, I think what's great is it's opening people's eyes to saying, how can we use this new tool to induce government to behave differently, smarter, more efficiently? And I'm all for that. But I think it's really important for philanthropy to be very conscious when it does that, because while that may make sense for some funders, others may say, no, I'm working on the issue of climate. I'm working on the issue of housing. And for us, what we've said is, great, if this tool solves a problem within the set of issues we're working on, we're all in, because you know what? We want to have all the tools on the table. We have the ability to make PRIs, we can make MRIs, we can make grants. So we want to use the right capital tool. We do guarantees, we've done linked deposits, we've done equity investments, we've done debt. So we want to have every tool at our disposal, because we don't know what the problem is that we're going to need to solve. I want to be careful about saying that we would, prioritize, though, one tool over another. That said, I think Ben can talk about, that's not to say that people who are doing this don't need help getting their deals off the ground. That's always been an issue in the housing space. How do you get pre-development underway?
Yeah, and I think it's a good point. So basically, so we've been investors in 2 of the 7, including one of them with you, and thank you. And what we've seen is right now it's obviously an early nascent field. So there's only so much. Everything is customized. It takes 2 years or more to put the deals together. But we're trying to look back. So many of us come from the housing world, and we're trying to say, how can we take lessons that we learned in 30 years of financing affordable housing and apply them, the ones that make sense, to this world? And so right now what we see is what we saw 40 years ago in housing, which was all the pre-development work on these deals is done through philanthropic grant money. That is not a scalable model. If you want to get thousands of deals, you can't expect that they're all going to be funded. And so Living Cities is 24 years old, and over those years we've put $450 million on the street for pre-development of affordable housing. And so as we've worked with social finance and third sector, what we're trying to figure out is, and we've built a early stage pre-development loan fund to be able to use on some early, right now, to see, can we really apply some of those same principles? Because what we have to do is get the scale, and understand what the risks are. I mean, the challenges about Pay for Success is ultimately the money has to be repaid by government. Very risky, 4-year terms, all kinds of, despite they promise to pay, government cannot decide at the last minute not to pay. So, you have to figure out what are those risks and how do you manage for them. But it was true in affordable housing, too. You're taking a lot of leaps of faith. So we're looking to try to figure out, can we use some of those same tools to build the pipeline? Reggie, did you want to add anything?
Yes. For us at the Kellogg Foundation, deal flow hasn't been an issue at all. The pipeline hasn't been an issue at all. Primarily because our communications department does do a good job of keeping our name out there, so we get a lot of deals just from the visibility we have with our mission-driven investing program. But also we have a third-party advisor in Imprint Capital that helps in sourcing and scanning as well. In addition, we get deal flow from the grant-making side and the investment side. And so, so for us, it's really been focusing on, one, which opportunities have the most impact from our mission perspective as well as from a financial perspective, and what really is our edge in each of these deals to help us, whether it's from the grant-making side or from the investment side, that will increase the probability of this investment being successful from a double bottom line perspective. So when you look at it, we have $100 million in dedicated capital. That's really not a lot of money when you look at the various ways in which we can use this money and capital to either from a direct investment, fund investment, fixed income investment, when you think about the different geographies in the U.S. and Africa. So for us, it's really been focusing on what our non-negotiables are and making sure that we have a high bar for that capital that we're putting to work.
Another question?
I'm Ali Dod Mafi-Nezam with the West Asia Council, and I'd like to pick up on something Mr. Sanders said, and that's this whole notion that resources and capital are scarce, especially for social entrepreneurs, social innovators. Often the dominant assumption is that capital is scarce, and yet since 2008 the stock market has done very well. And the question is, why is there this perception then that capital is scarce? Thank you.
Okay. No. For us, the mission-driven investment portfolio has to have, the financial return has to be there. So once, when you compare it to the other opportunities that we're considering for the foundation portfolio, that's what, makes it really scarce. And when you overlay the social component to it as well, that shrinks it, that makes the capital just even more scarce. So for us, that's what leads to it being a higher bar, because when you add these different parameters, we are very stringent in saying, okay, there has to be it has to meet the social objectives of the foundation. So for us, from an investment team perspective, that's what makes it challenging, makes it a higher bar for us in terms of investing.
I would just add that, when we're talking about social entrepreneurs, especially people working base of the pyramid markets or folks that are really breaking new ground, and I'm seeing Chris here from Village Capital, and you're working with entrepreneurs, and Acumen, and Echoing Green, and all of the others that, Ashoka, Skoll, that are funding people that are really at this forefront of trying to figure out how to use business practice to solve social problems. We're often talking, we have to be realistic, we're often talking about startups. Right. And we're talking about startups that have all the risks and difficulties of startups, but they're layered on top of the challenges of really having very serious mission purpose and really being, quite innovative, quite pioneering, working in the toughest markets that may not have legal contexts, regulatory contexts that are conducive, to business investing. So, I think we have to be realistic. These are incredibly illiquid investments. These are often angel type, what we would think of as angel or seed. And that is not capital that, even despite what the public equities market might be doing, right? Angel and seed money is its own special kind of capital. These are not investments where Kleiner Perkins, can just jump in, because they're not great big liquid companies that are going to have, and they're not going to have necessarily the IPO, as the exit to give the venture capitalists the multiple that they might look for. And I think we have to be really careful. Kresge's Kimberly Cornett, who cannot be here, has this great phrase that I want to just remind us about. She says, we have to be careful about unicorns, okay? And I think one example in which Kellogg is invested directly, and we're invested indirectly through a venture fund, is Revolution Foods. And that's a fantastic poster child company, right? Because it brings together solving childhood obesity, business practices. It's spreading like crazy. It's run brilliantly by these two former business school students. And, and maybe Rev Foods will get to an IPO one day, but maybe not. And the goal of Revolution Foods is not to make shareholders necessarily wealthy. Their goal is actually to solve this childhood obesity and education problem, but they're recognizing that to do that at scale, they need to make money. So there's this tension, and we've seen lots of social entrepreneurs that do a great job, but they don't have the financial profile for a traditional VC, you know, or stock market investor.
And I think Ann raised the question about having a glossary in the back. I mean, there's a lot of misunderstanding about terms in all of this stuff. I mean, basically, I think you're talking about grants. Yeah. And grants are really not an investment, right? I mean, and philanthropy uses the word investment broadly. You know, investments are where you expect the money back with a return in most normal nomenclature, but not philanthropy. You know, and so
It's not just philanthropy.
no, but it's just, I mean, we're in it too. I got 22 of them on my board. But the point is that there's a continuum, and even in impact investing, people think, oh, impact investing means you're getting your money back and you're giving nothing on the return side. And that is probably true for some things, but I actually think it's a continuum, and there's a whole from grants to 1% back, 2% back to 28% back or whatever, and you have to really be very clear about what you're talking about in that continuum, because it's not at all the same.
Ben, this is Jane. This is Jane Robinson.
We're glad you're here, though.
Hello. Oh, right. I'm here. Jane Robinson from First Book, and I think this raises up precisely the hole in the donut that we've found. We've had the First Book Marketplace is a market-driven social enterprise. We've had an average of 34% growth over the last 6 years. We launched in 2008. We are basically aggregating what I'll use the phrase the basic pyramid in the U.S., and it's grown to 150,000. It's characterized as an education system, but it's really not. It's economic well-being. It directly affects income inequality and so on. I won't go into the whole model, but I'd like to invent a new phrase here. You're hearing it here. Ecosystem-related investment, because what we find is we got a CDFI loan. It helped us. It was 2008. It was the term was 8% or something like that. We used it. We grew. We've now got a proven model, market-driven, tremendous success rate. But if we don't have a climate focus or an energy focus or a housing focus, people don't understand, or we don't make the argument properly, that there's a systemic solution we're bringing to the entire ecosystem of the base of pyramid. And we need capital. We need not 50,000, we need not 1 million, and we don't need 25 million holding hands with the government. What we need is 5 million. Yeah. And we've got a tremendous track record. We're business people. We know we're going to give an ROI and an SROI. So I'm seeing out there in the landscape a gap. Yes. And would love for everyone to start using ERI and would love. I mean, it's just a pleasure to see how much has evolved in the landscape. But would love to have conversations with people about that gap.
I would just say to that is that part of the challenge here also is there is no marketplace for doing this.
Yes.
And that's really the problem. No one can find you.
That's right.
So if they find you, you're just lucky. It's serendipity.
Well, I'm just going to have business cards printed out.
Yeah, well, even that's probably a little too retail for what you want. And so I think that's part of the, someone talked earlier about the early stage of this whole thing, and we're only this far because of people over the 30-year history, but we're still, if you think about the bell curve, we're at the long tail of the early stage, and there's no marketplace. The marketplace right now is John Goldstein. Yeah. Right? And so that's not really a marketplace. And he's fantastic, but even he will say there's too much work for one organization to do.
But if a set of people started setting up 1 or 2 or 3% of their funds, that might be cool.
Kind of like what's the equivalent of the Kiva, but at the institutional level? I mean, how do we take advantage of all the communications and possibilities, start having a place where you could sort of put out the offers and match up?
Yeah, thanks. I'm Barbara Lee from the World Bank. I was just curious if there's any cross-fertilization in the learning that's starting to happen with college endowments and your foundation endowments, because there are examples, they're primarily in the climate area, but there are examples where they need to, justify to their board that they're making a reasonable financial return, but also doing interesting environmental investments Tufts got their $100 million from Omidyar to do microfinance investments while still having to achieve their whatever 9% return. Do you guys talk to them, or are they talking to you to learn from you, or has there been any, because it's all about how far are you willing to go to slightly, or, maintain a reasonable financial return, but also do really, really good things in various investments.
Yeah, my sense is, and we haven't been deeply involved yet, but I would say it is mostly in the climate and energy space, including conferences that are starting to bring people together. There's one at ASU in January, I think. And then at a local level, it certainly happens, I know, in Minneapolis, and trying to share best practice of what are we learning. I would say, even though we say foundations move slow, I think the college endowments by and large, although the pressure from the students is helping, they're moving even more slowly by and large. And even the commitments they're making, quite honestly, like Stanford with the coal, it was kind of like us saying no coal. It's almost a no-brainer at this point. But I think the pace is starting to pick up, and it would be interesting to try and translate it to other areas, especially where there's anchor institutions like EDS that are doing more around kind of local economic development of a way to leverage that. But I'm not aware of forums that are doing that.
And I would just say so we have $300 million that is set aside for impact investments, and while we get calls from foundations, we get calls increasingly, and to Jane's last point, we get calls from wealth managers, asset managers who are thinking about going into the impact investing space, asking us to be helpful. I can't say that I've ever, in 20 years, had a call from a university to think about that particular kind of vehicle.
So on behalf of the universities, though, I would just dare say that they're thinking about it. So since I teach this class, just last week we had a list of 20 colleges that are doing this. But I would say that there's two nuances. One is that a majority have started in this vein of energy and climate change. And the other one is I'm using different processes. So at Georgetown, I'm proud to say that we have already done the climate thing, but that's because we're Jesuits and we would. But we've also done different allocations. So of the universities I put it, many of them have allocated portions to other managers who unfortunately have needed some training. So some of them have done specific managers who sit in this space, probably more so in the vein of economic development, because they're anchor institutions in their communities and can think about supply chain relationships. And a substantial amount have also allocated money to students with the sole purpose of doing both social as well as financial return. I would say a lot of that is because of the Responsible Endowment Coalition. So, not to say that anybody around the room hasn't, but I would say they have been persistent in getting students to, quote unquote, protest in the early days, from South Africa and apartheid. Let's be clear. Again, there's a long tail history here. So I would say you're beginning to see them. It's by no means the dollars we're talking about in philanthropy, but it is indeed happening. The biggest challenge, though, I think, to what Ben and you're raising is there's not a lot of places that can do this. Traditional money and asset managers, this is not their thing. They go, oh, that's cute. Go give it away. So I think there's this chicken and egg of people's intent, but then nowhere to actually place the dollars.
For us, it's really our conversations with endowments have primarily been on the climate change area, but we have had instances where investments in the mission-driven investment portfolio, fund investments, have also been invested in by other endowments because the financial part of the objective, as well as the social part of it, have been so compelling that it just overrides any social criteria that may be with that particular fund.
So let me hear your question.
So, I want to connect a couple of points and build on. I'm sorry. I'm Lisa Nutter from Philadelphia. I run a nonprofit youth development organization called Philadelphia Academies, Inc. And we have a number of partners. Our largest partner is the School District of Philadelphia. And all you have to do is Google state funding in Pennsylvania to understand how complex that is. So building on your point, Jane, I think to get to scale, many of us are working with these very large systems that haven't changed in 100 years. And so essentially, we were talking about the continuum. We're really trying to help turn uncertainty to risk, not risk to something better. I just want it to not be so uncertain. And we actually need this kind of capital as leverage with the system. And I'm wondering if there are any lessons that have been learned so far where we've seen organizations, funders, and investors really use this capital to help provide that kind of leverage.
Thank you. My name is Stephen Lee, and I'm a private investor out of Boston. And My question is, given the evolution of social impact bonds and to Deborah's point earlier about the foundation's willingness to provide financial guarantees, can any of you comment on the depth and evolution of foundations' willingness to provide financial guarantees as a way to unlock capital for social impact bonds or any deals for that matter?
Yep. So Deb wants to jump on
Yeah,
that.
I want to, because I think we can answer both questions with the same answer. I
for it.
think the foundations that have made guarantees are MacArthur, Casey, and Kresge is now a real leader in doing that. They're doing quite a lot of that in the healthcare field. And I don't know, Christine, I'm looking at you. I don't think there are many others. I think there are a handful of community foundations that have sometimes done guarantees for specific real estate projects, very specific projects. One of the guarantees that we did is profiled in the book, in the Aspen book, and it is exactly the problem, I think, that you're describing. And it was that a set of investors got spooked that Congress would fail to annually appropriate money that they were obligated to appropriate. They had a 20-year contract under a HUD contract, and for years, these investors were comfortable with that, and in fact, you could take that contract to the bank and you could go get a loan, you could raise equity capital against it, no problem. And they got spooked about Congress and started saying, we don't trust that government's going to be a good partner. You need to put a ton of money in a cash reserve up front. And the cash reserve was so huge that the deals didn't work. So in the case that we did, it's in a call-out box, the guarantee we provided was specifically, this is a little, only impact investing, right? Right. We were protecting investors from the risk that Congress would not honor its contracts. Yeah. And we decided we were willing to do that because we thought if Congress actually fails to honor in a big way its contracts for millions of low-income people across the country, it's not just the low-income people that are going to be upset. It's mayors and governors and all kinds of constituents that will come out. So we said, we're willing to take that and turn it into something. And the investors said, well, if we were there, we didn't have to do a 100% guarantee. We did 20% was what we thought we had to do. It ended up being like 9%. And that was enough for them to get comfortable. So I think that's kind of a model of saying, can we take government? That's what's happening in the SIB market, right? Can we take that? Because government has to be a good partner. Right. You're absolutely right. That's the risk.
And I would say, and I'll get the last word because I'm the moderator, right? But to get to Ms. Nutter, which is a familiar name in Philadelphia, by the way, who is one of the nation's best mayors, I will say. So we have an initiative that's been going on the last 4 years called the Integration Initiative. I won't bore you with that. You can go to our website and learn more. But our intent was that we wanted to marry from the beginning grants, PRI-like lending, and commercial debt all in the same thing, and that if you wanted to work towards a large-scale systems change, you had to build all of that into the plan at the beginning. And so it was really that you're not going to solve these problems without all of them. There's a recently released 3-year evaluation looking back on that work that talks a lot about the role of capital in that. I give it back to you, Ann.
Great. Fantastic discussion. So you all have 10 minutes to squeeze out and squeeze back in. The next panel session is going to be awesome. We're really going to go into the deals and the issues, so come right back. And if for any reason anybody's leaving and you have a seat at the table, let us know. And if you're not back on time, you might not have a seat at the table.